Hello everyone and welcome to an online chess class presented by me, Kestony, and today we're going to be looking at various Rook endgames. Simple and theoretical, advanced and practical, all sorts of Rook endgames, and I'm welcoming you to be very active in today's chat. If you have any kind of questions regarding chess, Rook endgames, particular positions, please do ask me. I enjoy answering all of those. And let's give also a couple of moments for people to come and say hello to me. Don't be shy, everyone who is watching. I'm welcoming to say hello to me in the chat. Also have to make sure that you guys will be able to see me and hear me well. All right, I think I can see myself. That means you guys can too, and hopefully you can hear me as well. So if anyone can confirm that the audio quality is good, just let me know in the chat. I can see some people already coming. Very happy to see you all. Hello. All right. All good. Hello, Mitchell. Hello, Doll. Hello, everyone. All right, we can start then. So, at first, we're going to look at a couple of very theoretical, must-known positions that are very easy. So, it's going to be how to defend against some of the pawns, corner pawn, knight pawn, and if the pawn is in the middle, we're going to take a look at very common positions that are called Philidor and Lucena. And then gradually I'm going to show you the very hard ones that are also very practical. But as I was preparing, and anyone who read endgame books, they will know that even grandmasters make so many mistakes in these endgames. So it just tells us that the price for a wrong move is high, and there were a lot of not won endgames in the past, in even the top level games. All right, so let's start some more very simple. The first position that I would like to show you is how to draw if your opponent has an extra pawn, which is the side pawn. So first of all, we would love to have our king in front of that pawn. Here our king is chilling on h1. That's a particularly very good square, as it's where the pawn wants to end up on and have a new queen. And against the corner pawns, A or H, it is enough to have king as we do here and just walk with our rook back and forth on the first rank. So authors of various books describe the method differently, but I think it's called a passive defense in most, or just a back rank defense. And in this position, black is unable to create any kind of progress. So as the black is trying to make something, we're just walking back and forth with our rook, rook a1, rook c1, rook a1, rook c1, and the draw will be agreed. Any checks are met by king walks near the corner, g1 and h1, and there is nothing that black in this position can do. So you wouldn't believe also how many students of mine have decided here to start walking with the rook somewhere and try to check from behind, and even have gotten mated, right? And I'm speaking to about my very youngest students that are 6-year-old, 7-year-old, right? Or inexperienced adults. So also must-known position with the knight pawn. If we manage to get our king onto g1 or h1 square, the draw looks very similarly. It is enough for our rook to walk back and forth on the first rank. Again, if the king is on g1 or the h1 square. So we can say go rook c1, and after any check we go rook g1. And it is the only important moment to remember is that if, for example, black's rook is giving us a check to g2, is not to go away from the corner to f1, as then the position becomes lost. So king h1 here draws comfortably. Black is unable to create any kind of progress. Again, I would like to reiterate myself that king stays on g1 and h1, whereas rook stays on the first rank, whichever squares are available. But I would like to give you the first exercise that is perhaps the easiest out of all today. How does black win here, guys? Black to play and win the game. So perhaps you might be playing this from the black's point of view, and you know that it's a theoretical draw, but your opponent might make a mistake which looks like that. So it is also important to know, how do we win these positions? How to enter anything that makes progress for black, and black would be able to win this. Black to play and win. Hello, Gagandeep Singh Bindra, if I pronounce that right. King h1 is not possible for black right now. It's black to play and win. Remember, black to play and win. And h1 would be this square, but king cannot just jump over h2 square like that. Right, so Mitchell and also Kumar is suggesting the right move, and welcome Chris as well. The move is king h2, and that's what we wanted to prevent as white. So a very simple move that makes progress for the black side. And now if we basically keep on waiting, there is a skewer first of all on g1 square, and white is losing the rook. And if instead we try something like rook a8 and get from the back rank, eventually we're gonna get to a so-called Lucena position perhaps here, something that we're going to win a bit later on. It's also possible just to hide like that, say rook a1 check, and then we move king g7. And this position already, it's clear that black is making progress, and later we're going to learn various methods of how to win such position. But even without knowing the theory, I'm pretty sure that you will be able to. In Rook endgames in general, sheltered for the king is one of the most important things when it comes to playing versus 1 or 2 pawns. And here, the only thing that we need is somehow provide shelter from our king, and one of the ways is, say, to play rook h3, move the king to h2 where it can hide from the checks, and say something like this would be one of the plans of how we can make progress from here. So, all right, so it's clear that with the knight pawn, we just want to stay in the corner, and then we're absolutely safe in case we want to make a draw. Now, I have to mention a couple more theoretical positions. This is one of them. This time we're fighting versus the pawn that is c7, e7, d7, or c2, d2, e2, or f2. And if the pawn is ready on the 7th and our king is in front, then passive defense is enough. So here we could just be waiting rook c1, rook a1, rook c1, rook a1, and black cannot do anything. But remember, this is only applied when the pawn is on the 7th and our king is in front. And now let's take a look at what if the pawn is not on the 7th, and here already passive defense is not enough. So in this position, if white was to play rook c1, winning is a bit similar to the previous position. Black plays rook to g2, and if we go to the corner, he lands another check, so that when king moves to g1, we can play f2. And now the only move is king f1, after which black is winning the white's rook. So if we go back a little bit, as you can see, passive defense is not enough, and if we move to the side, then again rook to h2 would win, and if we move to h1, then we could repeat the position with rook h2 and f2. And as you can see, versus any pawn that is on any actually of the squares on the on this blue arrows, so from c2 to c7, so from c3 to c7, and from f3 to f7, we have to know what is called the Philidor position and the Philidor method of drawing this. So let us find number 5, And here I'm going to teach you how to draw not only again against just this pawn, but if the pawn was on any of the red squares over here. So the method is this. We place the rook on the a3 square with the idea of not allowing the black's king to cross the 6th rank and create mating threats, right? So if we were just to wait, right, first of all, the king could make progress, and then there are various checkmate threats, and it's not going to be a draw for white. So instead, after rook a3, the only really way that black could be making progress over here is by pushing the pawn. Rook's checks on b1, b2, they don't achieve anything because we go king e2, king e1, and no progress has been made. So remember the main idea, first of all, not allowing the black's king to come to the 6th. Now, as they push the pawn, the draw is very easy. We just go to the back of the board, and this time we see a position where black's king is not having a shelter and cannot hide from the white's checks. That's why I mentioned that having shelters in many of these positions is very, very important. So many people are coming to the chat. Roy, hello to you. Hussein, Shiru, many people, and very happy to see you all. If you're enjoying the video, thank you very much for putting a like on this stream. That means a lot to me, and hopefully you're learning about this Philidor position and enjoying the lesson. As I mentioned at the start of the lesson, we're going to start with the basics, but gradually we're going to increase the level, and there will be quite a very challenging exercises later on that are going to be not only very beautiful, but also we'll see that grandmasters made many mistakes in those as well. So if you solve them correctly, that makes you perhaps for that particular moment better than a grandmaster, right? So here, yeah, the point is that we're getting the rook from behind, and black's king is unable to hide from the checks. The most popular perhaps position and most known position in rook endgames. Again, want to emphasize, if the pawn is on any of the red arrows here, or in the middle even, we just put the rook on the 3rd rank, and we're waiting for them to push the pawn to the 6th or the 3rd, depending on which color you play, and then we get checks from behind. So let's get to number 6. And number 6, where are you hiding from me? Here you are. And here it is white to play. There are various methods of winning that. The method itself is called building the bridge. So how does it look like? The king of whites would like to move out somehow, and this way allow the pawn to move forward and promote. The problem with that is that as we move out, the black's king is going to continuously give us checks, right? And as I said, in many rook endgames, giving the shelter for our king where it could hide from the checks is very important, especially if we are intending to win the game. So here white is playing rook c1, which will allow the black's king safely to march out, and then the black's rook won't be able to give checks. So rook c1, rook to d3, king moves out, say king to e7, and now a very important move for white, as black is defending d8 here enough. We're giving this check on e1, and as the king moves out, we're promoting into a queen. So very simple method. Some might say this is not building a bridge, but it's very much related to it, and soon we're going to learn to build the theoretical and everyone's agreed bridge. So this one is, again, very important and simple. And here for the first time, we're going to build the most common bridge. It's also called bridging. They made the verb out of it, and others could also call it Lucena position. At least that's how it's known. So it's perhaps the most important winning rook endgame to know. White is absolutely winning here, and many of other complicated rook endgames lead to this particular position, where we know that it is a theoretical win, and we no need to further analyze those positions, as we know how to win them. So as always in these similar endgames, white's king needs to get a shelter so that the black's rook wouldn't be able to check it. We want to move out and then promote the pawn. Unfortunately, now it's not possible because, okay, black's rook can just check us from the side, and nothing is gained from that, as we cannot hide from any kind of checks. Now, the key then is to move our king to other side of the board so that the black's rook cannot give it checks from the so-called long side. If you can see, sometimes players divide the board into longer and short. Since the pawn is on the e file, then this side is called long and the red side would be called short. We're gonna learn about more in a moment. So first we go rook g1, and we cut off the black's king. If black kings go to f6, then winning is very easy. Now it turns out that the black's king is helping us and giving us a shelter from any kind of checks, and next move, no matter what he plays, white is promoting the pawn. So a bit more challenging would be what to do if black plays king to h7. Yes, David, we're looking at Lucena position, exactly, also known as building the bridge or bridging. They made a verb out of it, right? So here white plays a weird looking move that is not weird if you ever seen Lucena position, but I imagine if this is the first time for you in the rook endgames, then it might look a bit weird. We're placing the rook on the fourth. Why? Well, let's take a look. It will give white a shelter from the black's rook checks. So black's rook goes to d2 and doesn't allow the white's king to move to the side, and white is lurking out. So we're going king to f7. Well, black is saying, okay, perpetual check, right? Check, check, and offers a draw, right? And now you're going to see the point of the rook of ours on g4. So after king to f6 and king to f2, we're going king to e5. And after rook e2, here comes the goal and the purpose of the rook being on g4. We can play rook e4, and exactly that, what you see on the board, is called building the bridge. It's sort of like building a shelter for our king, so that it could hide away from the black's checks. And no matter what they play, okay, they could take the rook, but we're going to promote our pawn. So once more, I'm going to emphasize, because it's very important, we give a check and force black's king out. That gives us an opportunity to sneak out with our king later, and the move is to put the rook on the fourth or on the fifth if we are playing with the black color. So rook to d2, and then our king moves out, and you see this beautiful bridge. By the way, don't go king f5 here. I have seen that, right? Right, that's a draw, right? So you go king f6, and then you move to king to e5, and this is what we are aiming for. Yes, logic engine, rook g4. All right, that's how it is, yeah? Okay, number 8. So I want to put the same position on the board, but this time it is black to play. And black can draw this position because the rook is on the good long side here, and black is able to provide the checks from the side. So the rule of thumb to remember is that the king of the defender wants to be on the short side, and the rook wants to be on the long side. So again, the short side is, the sides are divided by the pawn that is on the board. So if pawn is e, then this is the long side because there are 4 squares here, and this is the short side because there are 3. So king on the short side and rook on the long side. What is the logic behind it is that white's king takes so long to catch the rook that inevitably the pawn, say on e2, on e7 would drop. So for example, king moves out and we're giving checks, and king moves out and we're giving checks, and when he is going to c7, we're in time to skewer the pawn, and if king b6 we can win it. Now if, say, it was the short side and the rook was on b6, you can see the problem. Rook gets attacked too early, and there are no such skewers because rook already would have been on b7, where it would be in touch by the opponent's king, right? So a super important rule can save you many times. Right, in the last position there was also an interesting question asked, and it's a very popular question, I have to say. So say we go here, rook on g5, it's touched by the opponent's king. That's the problem, right? So that doesn't mean that you don't win, right? But it will take you much longer. Now you have to set everything up again somehow, and it's a bit different because, okay, you go rook e5. Again, you don't build the shelter for now from the checks, because I could go king g7, right? And it at some point could get a little bit weird, right? So king d7, it seems like you are saving your king from the checks from the side, from the back, but there is also the side, right, where I can provide you perhaps the checks, right? Although here I think that I'm just promoting, right? King c6 and king f7 doesn't stop me because the rook is watching over the e8 square. But the point is that here the rook is touchable, whereas on g4 it's not touchable, and then that method just works precisely without any additional variations for you to need to know, right? So that is the main reason. It's further away from the opponent's king. Hopefully that answers your question. Yes, all right. Very glad that you understand, and Krish. Okay. All right, and I'm welcoming everyone who is having any kind of questions related to the positions. Please do ask. I enjoy answering and having discussions, anything chess related or related to this particular topic. And don't be shy, say hello, I don't bite. All right, so here I have already an advanced exercise for you. It is white to play and draw. And I want you to choose between two moves. Rook h3 attacking the pawn, or rook h8 and going for the back. Only one of these two draw. So one of them is incorrect. There are many moves that draw, but one of these is losing. What would you play with white? I'm also welcoming everyone who just joined to say hello in the chat. Also, if you are enjoying the lesson, please do put the like on this video and try to be active and participate in the lesson as much as you can. Thank you very much. So this is already a bit more advanced, definitely. So Antrikish is suggesting rook h8, Prolific is saying rook h8, Alessio is saying rook h3, and also Hussein is saying rook h3. So we have the suggestions 50-50. Mitchell is saying rook h8, Raul is saying rook h8. So now, okay, we have more people saying rook h8, right? Roy, hello, nice to see you again. Hello. Right, so in this particular position, rook h8 is correct. Most of you are correct, and here is why. And a very common rook endgame I have had, definitely this in a game. After rook h3, the point is that black's king can make progress with king to c1. We're in check now. Okay, we move king b3 because from there we can still attack the pawn, which is going to be on c2. Black plays c2, and now the problem is that after usually drawing move, which is rook to c3, there is just king b1. And now you wish that rook was on h8 because you could give a check in this point, right? And then you would be saved. Now king must take probably the rook, and this is, okay, a theoretically winning endgame. Now, against a human, I can win this easily with black. Against a computer, it's pretty hard, right? Because computer are very good at defending. So in the same line, if we play rook h8, then it is a draw. So for example, king to c1 check, king to b3, c2, king to c3, attacking the rook, not allowing any king b1s, because king b1 is met with rook to b8, right? And now it's different, right? So I guess you have to walk king c1, because otherwise you're just losing the game, right? So that particular check on b8, I guess, is what is the main line and prevents black from drawing that. Again, any rook d1s, for example, right? I could just stay with, say, rook a8, and our king on c3 is simply a monster, right? So again, king to b1 is met by rook b8, right? And the droids agreed. Black finds it very hard to defend from and find the shelter for his king, right? All right. Let's go to number 10 then. Lots of practical exercises I have for you, not only from theoretical positions, trust me. Here, where should we go with the king? 2 moves draw and 2 moves lose. So, would you choose, let me just ask that, up or down, right? Would you go up or down? Would you go up with the king or down? How to make a draw here? The way I would encourage my dear students to practice the rook endgames is setting up these positions and playing them versus computer. Very, very important. You can do it on, say, chess24. Just set up the position and practice these particular positions versus computer. If you can draw this against computer, you're confident that no human is a match for you in that, right? So perhaps it's one of the only things we can practice against computer. Otherwise, they're just crushing us. Okay, we have Hussein is suggesting up. Roy and Alessio is saying down, and Mitchell is saying up. Whoa, right? So 50-50 again. Very nice. If you were all correct all the time, I would be actually wondering if I pick up the right exercises, right? You're not learning anything. Now, if I know that some of you, or even big part of you, are incorrect, then I know that I'm teaching you something very, very relevant. And you could imagine getting yourself into these as well. So Ankrish is saying up, and Kasun, hello, welcome to the chat, is saying up as well. So in this particular position, we're gonna analyze both. Here you have to go up. So if you go down, it loses. For example, let's just say we go random, king a1, then rook to f1 check, and there's gonna be c2, and after rook d8, we're not moving to the left, right, with the king, as that would give white the check on c8, but not that it matters. But even easier would be to go to e4, I guess. Or okay, both win, doesn't matter, it just lost, and eventually the king will just catch the rook, right? So if we go king to b1 in this case, then it's the same thing. So black just gives a check on f1, forces us, and rook c1, and basically you just cannot prevent c1 queen. Like whatever you do, you cannot put 2 defenders on it, right? So you cannot both play king b2 and rook c8 with 1 move. Now, how do things change if we go up? So king say to b3. Okay, we're still allowing a check, say rook to b2 check, but then king a3. And black is unable to make progress here, at least from it's a dead draw basically, because c2 runs into king b2, king takes b2, and we're in time. And we'll also have, always keep in mind the long side to keep checking the black's king from there, right? Now, if they were to go c2 after king b3, then we just go rook to h1, and we're stopping and controlling c1 square, right? So here, if we get, say, king to b2, there is nothing that stops us from getting the blockade that we need, and so we reach a draw. So we have to go up because of exactly that, right? c2, we are in time to play rook h1, and if rook b2, then it's very hard for black to be making progress from here. So imagine like black plays, for example, rook b7, and we're just keeping on checking and checking and checking and checking, right? That's why rook belongs on the long side as we're defending, and king belongs on the side of short, right? Right, so practical ones, as you can see, I would again set up these versus computer and practice. If you have a friend, do that with friend. I pick computer because if I can draw this against computer, then I am not afraid of anyone in these end games, right? Now, this one is theoretical and must-known position. Against the corner pawn, white is moving up. The question is, where should black go? King g7 or king e7? That's the question for you guys. Everyone who has just joined to the stream, I can see there are a lot more people right now. Don't be shy and say hello to me in the chat. I would encourage all of you to participate in the lesson actively by giving questions and answers to my own questions in the chat. I don't bite, don't worry. And also, if you're enjoying this stream, thank you for putting a like on this video of mine. That helps me to understand that I pick the right examples and you're enjoying the lesson. So, massive amount of answers. People are screaming G7. Zapol is asking where I am from. Currently, I'm living in Europe, in a country called Lithuania. Very interesting that we have so many answers. Hello, Rishi. Hello, welcome to the stream. So, I see no King E7 at all in the chat. Whoa, right? Everyone is saying King to G7. All right. So everyone knows this stuff. Yeah, the point is that if we go King to E7, right, we bring the pawn to A7, and I guess that was your plan. Then Rook to H8, and there is a skewer. Mamma mia, right? We don't want that, right? So the point is that Rook A7, Rook H7, and Black is losing the Rook. And otherwise, we're just promoting, right? So in these positions, King must stay on G7, and that is enough to draw. Now, if White pushes to A7, then we just go King H7, King G7, King H7, King G7, and it would be an easy draw. So for example, all right, we can play A7, and let's just say King is walking. Oh, it's our move, okay, and walking, and walking, and walking, and walking, right? And then at some point when it's on B7, we start giving checks. And as I mentioned today at the start, having the shelter for your king in Rook endgames, super important. More important than many other things. You wouldn't believe like in how many endgames this is the theme, right? So that's how you make a draw, and then, okay, you keep on checking and checking and checking, right? And you go back eventually, right? But they might not play A7, right? So White, and if you want to play for the win, you wouldn't believe how many people I tricked with this plan, right? We go the King to A7, right? Rook will move out. Let's play this on the board. King F3, and imagine King to H7. What if they just all they knew was what I showed you before, right? This is lost now. He goes, and he goes, and he goes, and he goes, and Black thinks this is a draw, but now we have A7 square for the king, right? So now our Rook could move out. That was the point, that we have the shelter for the White's king. And as the king moves out, okay, here, King B7, and then the red carpet. That's how I call it when we have this. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone who is enjoying this stream. This means a lot to me, and everyone who just joined, actively participate in the stream, ask me any kind of chess related questions about anything you want to know more, right? Or particular positions. And also, if I ask questions, I encourage you to participate actively in the chat. So this is not enough to draw. So how do we draw? And this is a very known maneuver for Black. Then the move is Rook to F1, double exclamation mark, right? And now when King is moving to that up left corner, Black is putting the Rook on F6. So the idea is to cut off the White's king and at the same time keep attacking A6. So now it's sort of a barrier that White's king cannot cross, right? Black's Rook is preventing from that. So let's see, King to D5, Rook to B6, King to C5, Rook to F6, and there is no progress that you could make from here. Now, it's very important that you don't put the Rook on G6. Why? Because you will want from here to check the White's king from the side, right? So for example, Rook to F5, and you get same position where White doesn't have a shelter. But after King to B7, if your Rook was on G6, right, then you wouldn't have this Rook G7 check, which you do have now, right? Rook F7. And so this is a way to draw. So Ashes is asking, how is double fianchetto opening? Is it advisable to go for it? I know Spanish people say fianchetto, I believe, and that's how it's supposed to be spelled. But I know that everyone else is saying fianchetto, especially in British or American English, right? That's the way to pronounce it. is it advisable to go for it, right? Regarding the openings, depends on your level. Just it's more important to play the opening itself well than knowing the opening theory. So I don't know your exact level, but if you're, say, below 1600, then controlling the center, developing the pieces, castling, knowing those things are first more important than theory, right? And then you have to play the openings that fit your own character and style, right? So if you're more lazy, don't play the main lines. If you're not lazy, if you're a hardworking person, then you could be playing the absolute main lines. If you're sharp, against d4, play Benoni's, play Benko Gambits, where there are lots of tactical possibilities, right? If you're solid, right, play Slav, play Queen's Gambit Decline. It depends on the person, and there is no golden truth. That's why grandmasters are playing different stuff as well, right? Yeah, it also depends, of course, on the opponent. All right, I have many more beautiful ones for you today. Okay, one last theoretical one that is super important. So now it is white to play. Someone is also asking d4, e4 if they want to attack. In the old days, it was always e4 that is attacking, or that was how it was more known. So with e4, you get more attacks. And the recent years that have changed at the highest level. So now I play d4 to get the attacks, right? So, but I would recommend that at your level, I think if you want to get more attacks in general, only in general, e4 should help you a bit more, right? So here is the hardest, maybe theoretical position that you have to learn today, but also must known. And it's going to be a decision where to put our king, short or long side. And as I mentioned, the rule of thumb is to put the king on the short side as a defender and put the rook on the long one. So here we play rook to c8. And it's going to be hard for black to hide from checks. So he plays king to c3. If they play pawn to c3, it's just Philidor. So we keep on checking and checking and checking. And we have seen this. There is no hideout for black's king from the checks. So we draw it like in one of the previous positions. But he could play king c3. And now it's a big decision. So left or right, guys? Where do you go? So I hope you managed to... those who were from the start, I hope you will say the correct answer. Where to go with the king? Left or right? B1 or D1? Where to go, guys? Yeah, mate is threatened, right? By the way, hello to you. I never know your name, but you're always in my streams. Very nice to see you again. Hope you're doing well. Okay, Alfonso, who's saying? Everyone, Cispal, king to b1. Except for Cispal, he's saying king to d1. So where do we go? Left or right, guys? Yeah, alright, guys. So, as I mentioned, when you're defending in the Rook endgames, king goes to the short side and the rook goes to the long side, right? So here, king to b1. The logic behind that is that we will want to put our rook and check him from the side. So as for example, okay, say rook g1 happens, and for example, rook to c1 to make progress. Now, as we going for rook h8 and side checks, we're very far away from the black's king. And that is why the rook wants to be on the long side. Like, it takes so much time for him to get to the rook that in the meantime you will just catch this pawn and set up a blockade, right? That is being the point of why you don't want to go to with the king to the short, with the king to the long side. So let's test a couple of options. Say king to d3. Then we play king to b2, and we're watching over this c3 square over here. So for example, check. Again, king to c1, he goes back to c3, and we're walking circles, right? So it's just a repetition. If he goes something like c3, rook to d8, Philidor, again, we know we keep on checking, and it is a draw, right? So after we play king a2, they could try rook to c1. Now we go for the side checks. As you can see, black's rook is not defending the black's king well from the checks. So he could try rook to d3 with the idea of blocking the check. So for example, rook h3, rook d3. Now it's also possible to say try king to d2, but then again, just side checks and king to b2 eventually, and we're blocking everything, and it is a draw. So as they're playing this rook to d1 with the idea of blocking our checks from the side, we're gonna play rook to c8 back, right? And it's very hard from here for black to be making progress. So one of the tries is king to d3, then we go king to b2. Again, must prevent here c3. Not the only way, but easier to remember when you have to prevent something, right? There is a threat. Easier on the memory. So check, for example, king to c1, rook to h2, and we're walking basically in circles, right? So say king to c3, king to b1, and draw. And as always, c3, Philidor, keep giving checks, and it is a draw. So this is the most advanced theoretical position that I wanted to show you today, but it's also a must-know. So someone wants to know how to blockade if the black's king walks towards the white's rook. Yeah, sure. So there are many ways to win. First of all, let's check the one with king to d1, right? Because that's what everyone is interested in. What happens if the white's king goes to the long side? So say first of all, rook to g1, and now your king is the one that will prevent the white's king, the white's rook from checking our king, right, from the long side. All right. So many move wins here, actually. There are too many moves that win, but say rook c1 is simplest, and we're going to eventually bring the king to b2 and c2 and push the pawn. So for example, you're waiting, I go king to b2, you're giving a check, now I go king to c2, and I have already a resource of pushing to c3, right? So rook to c7, c3, now I want to move out the rook, so rook say to here, rook to b1, rook to c7, and I'm eventually, as you can see, I'm making this progress, and black will win by building the bridge. Remember, like bam, bam, check, and Lucena position, what we have been learning today. Or even like not like that, but sometimes I could just move to the b3, right? But I think that this is what we learned today, right? Give a check, kings move out, and then the king will move out, right? And the rook will of blacks block the check, right? There was hope that answers the question. And yeah, there was another question that I wanted to answer, but Eccentric Horse, very nice to see you today again. Thank you for also helping me to make this stream, because you just answered the question. So as we were discussing why king cannot go to... So okay, at which point did you guys have a question? Here probably, right? So they were asking what happens if black's king is walking towards the white's rook, right? And we said king to b2. So now, first of all, your rook is hanging, and I have no defensive task because your king is just so far away from attacking my rook in the first place that this is not even the long side, it's the long side, right? It would be enough even with the pawn to d4, but now it's like you're 3 tempo away from attacking my rook. It's just wrong, as you can see, right? So you're moving somewhere, and anything draws here, right? Say here, right? And the idea is I'm gonna pick up the pawn, right? It's walking in circles and a draw, right? So that's why, remember the rule of thumb. King goes to the short side as a defender, rook goes to the long side, so that opponent's king couldn't touch your rook. Thank you, Joshi, for a compliment. Many questions. Also, what if rook c2, right? I think Eccentric is also helping me there in the chat, right? Okay, so again, I would like to make a couple of points. Do set up these positions. For example, set up this particular position against the computer maximum level, against Stockfish, say on chess 24, and just make a draw. Just play it for 50 moves with the white color. As soon as you make a mistake, go see what was the mistake and try again and again and again. You need to make a draw here against computers, so say 40 moves, yeah? And you will see you're gonna make some mistakes, computer will find some resources. And you're gonna stop, learn what was the problem, you will know what to do instead, and that's how I like to test these theoretical positions, or even some practical ones, And then I'm not afraid of any grandmaster. Like after you draw Stockfish, that's it, right? Right, everyone who just joined the chat, I'm welcoming you to actively participate in it. As you can see, chat is active. Please do ask me chess-related questions. Participate in the questions and answers, and also if you enjoyed the lesson, I would appreciate if you could put a like on this video. Thank you very much. Yes, so exactly, GG, and in these particular positions, if white doesn't make a mistake, it is a draw. So black cannot develop the initiative. So Yosh is asking where he could try this against computer. There are like ask Google, like just if you type into Google engine and set up position, there are like many resources. One of them would be chess24.com, right? All right, next ones. I have so many beautiful ones. I have to be in time to show you those. Do we have more theoretical ones? Okay, this one was also a real game and it's kind of theoretical, okay? So this is the question. F7 or Rook H3, guys? Grandmaster made a mistake here. So F7, pawn to F7 or Rook H3? One of them is winning and one of them is not. All right, so in this one, the mistake that was made by Grandmaster was Rook H3, and Magnus, Alfonso, Cispal, HAA, Kiada, Daruka, everyone is suggesting pawn to F7, and that is right. When you have a passed pawn, you gotta push it, right? There are many other wins. You could also go Rook D8, King E7. Now, why Rook H3 is not winning? It's instructional how black makes a draw. So we go King G6. If white goes F7, there is a check, and that's the problem, and then we pick up the pawn. So white needs to go Rook G3, King to H7, then white played F7, and now we have this Rook C8, and we are defending this way. Notice how after Rook C6 there is King D7, and it's kind of like Rook was on the long side, but not on the long part, not the distant part of the long side. And this is exactly what you guys were asking, right? This would have happened sometimes if the king went to the long side and Rook would have ended up on the short side. The Rook just gets attacked and it wins the crucial tempo, right? So say here, and next move, we're promoting the pawn. So instead of that, Rook has to go to the back rank, and here it is enough to draw. King E7, check, and check, right? Again, here there is no possibility of playing King D6 because Rook F7, right? So King E8, and we're checking, and after King D7, we just go back to that side of the board, and if you ever bring the Rook, I bring the King, right? So this is how the draw is agreed. So for example, Rook to F3 and King to G7. Now instead, you guys were correct at the very start. So if F7, say Rook, okay, King to G7, we give a check. If you go to F8, it's mate, right? You cannot go there. And once the king goes to the right, we promote. So Rook E2 is a better try here. And then we're gonna have a hideout, right? King to C1. And now the Lucena position. Okay, kind of Lucena. I exactly don't know. There are so many Lucena positions, right? The point is to have this hideout, right? So his own king is preventing from giving the checks to my king, right? And so it's sort of a shelter. That's why I emphasize throughout this whole lesson, right? Having a shelter is the main thing in the Rook endgames. Like it's in every position, as we can see, right? So I hope we have time for beautiful ones now, okay? All right, this one you could try. Win by force, white to play. How to win by force here. You guys, this is beautiful but very simple one. And then I will give you hard but beautiful ones. they're gonna shock you. So this one we can dedicate like 30 to 60 seconds, okay guys? I want to leave time for the ones you have never seen before. And those were gonna be mistakes made by grandmasters in the later ones. Yes, everyone is screaming, right? All right. So f6, I had to show this. The idea is if king f6, we give a check and promote. Right, that being the point. And okay, if king to f7, we have this idea of rook h8, right? They pick up the pawn, we get a skewer, right? That's the typical idea, right? Also, of course, if they go to the side, we just, I guess, right? We just push, right? Right, that being the point, right? Okay. Now, where are our beloved ones? 15, let's try, let's see. No, this is very long game. Okay, black to play and win. Not very easy, but easy still. Just not very easy. So black to play. Okay. Yoshi, we have already made a lot of videos on the openings. If you go back on Chess24 stream, you will see a lot of these. Hello, Alan. Very nice to see you. Josie is saying I say right too much. Maybe I need to come up with a synonym for that word. I will say yes or okay. Okay, Josie? I will do my best not to say that too many times, okay? I'm trying to get better at everything, just like you do, all right? Forgive me for this. Someone is saying they had this position 2 hours ago. Hello, Alan Jackson. Hello. Very nice to see you. So black to play and win. Many different suggestions. Okay. So one of the suggestions was rook to b1, and after king e2 to go rook g1 with the idea of winning the pawn. But maybe white has rook a4, right? What about that? So king to f5, right? We're prolonged in line. Now rook takes h4 here, and this one you cannot win, right? White's king is just in time, right? Monster king by white, right? Too active. Okay, good try. Yes, my English is my second language, guys. I'm not a native English speaker, but hopefully I speak with an accent that is understandable for all of you. Yeah, Josh is also suggesting rook to g5. So what's the idea, first of all, of how can the rook get to g5, right? That's illegal, guys. I flipped the board, right? Maybe I should flip the board like that, and black's pawns are going down. All right. So there are also suggestions of playing h3. Many. So if h3, are you sure it's enough? So what if I take? How do we win this? White's king is in very good place, right? So say rook h2, for example, and okay, anything draws here probably. I can continue giving checks, right? And we're gonna get to some kind of Philidor again, right? Yes. So some of you are correct. Congratulations. I can see Torteboro is also suggesting the right move. It's actually, guys, rook b1. And then after king e2, we play h3, and it just runs. Right? Harry the pawn wins. So, okay, we can try some things. Say h3, g2. Next move we promote. Right? You can give some checks, but eventually we'll get to your rook and checks will stop, and there is pretty much nothing you can do over here, right? Like check doesn't help, right? I'm just going towards and you have no ideas, right? So takes and g2 being the point, right? So I think the best you could do is g4, but again, we're strong enough to know this is winning, right? Okay. So this was rook b1. and followed by h3. Congratulations to those of you who solved this one. More beautiful ones. I had one very beautiful one. I'm gonna get to that. Okay, this one, black to play and win. I'm gonna put it from the white's point of view. White to play and win. Black to play and win. Kevale is saying he has an exam today, tomorrow, but still watching this. And Lord Chess, hello. Hello, everyone. So, how does black win this one? Josh is asking how often do I stream? On Chess24, I stream on Tuesdays and Fridays. So Tuesdays on 8 CEST and on Fridays at 2 CEST, like today. So for now, that's my schedule, guys. Welcoming all of you to show up on Tuesday again. Many suggestions. As these are tricky because also grandmasters made mistakes, right? In these ones. So first of all, many people are suggesting rook to f2 in this position. How does white make a draw here? What about rook b8? So now the idea is that if rook takes on g2, we can play king to f5, and it's going to be a very, very sad day for black, as I think we're getting mated. So this idea is very easy to miss, and I don't blame anyone who thought, for example, this particular line was winning. So the idea is very strong, and simply getting this checkmate threat. Of course, you're not forced to enter that from here. You could play rook g5, but then these checks get really, really annoying, right? So say rook f6, I could imagine king g4. It's even for me not so clear, to be honest, right? But I could imagine that this is a draw, right? But even I have to think, because there are many different deviations, and we can divert from the main line quite a lot. So the winning move again here is perhaps unexpected one. Black is playing f3, which is just ridiculous. And it's a very, very hard move. Like, even if I give this to grandmaster, I would not expect him to... I would expect him perhaps not even to solve this, but even if he does, it's not immediate. It's very, very hard, because I showed this for the purpose of beauty. It's a very beautiful one. And after rook takes f3, it's ridiculous. Rook takes rook to f2. I mean, just look at this, guys. Ridiculous. Chess player 101 is asking if I play blitz. Actually, almost don't play at all. I'm not a chess player, guys. I'm only a chess coach. For the last 8 years, my main job is teaching chess. I'm teaching for around 40 hours a week. I unfortunately have no time to be playing, and I'm just a chess coach, guys. If I should say just, right? No, guys, I barely play. So I play some online, of course, right? So if we look at this position after rook to f2, what is the main idea? Well, what does white do is the question, right? So after rook f4, black is going king to g5, and now g2 will drop. So white needs to go back. And now we enter a winning position. So rook to g2, for example, king to e3, and white's king is not getting there in time. So for example, rook to f6, rook to the side, right? And this is just winning. For example, rook here. And as you can see, we have seen something like this already before. Simply white's king is not where it's supposed to be. So this idea really of f3 and rook f3 was not only missed by grandmasters in the game, but also by those who studied the game, right? And it was only later that with many brain power, maybe even the machine power, it was figured out to be winning. Chess player, just find Kestony. Anyone who is wondering about me, if you type into Kestony, I think into Google, I think there is gonna be plenty of information, guys. Right? Very simple, right? All right. So this was at the end. I wanted to show you a lot of these beautiful ones. So yeah, we have a question by Eccentric Horse. At which point after rook takes g2 you want to go rook f8 here? Let me think. My king, if I move the rook, will be able to hide on on g2, right? If I move the rook away. So for example, say, okay, give a check, depends on where you go. Maybe like after king f3 I'm lucky to have rook f2 skewer, but otherwise I'm getting your king very active, right? So okay, let's say king to d3, and now my king will be having this hideout on g2, right? I think that's how it's won, right? So just move it to the side, say, I don't know, a2, right? And as you're making checks, I guess I just go to hide on g2. I don't know if rook a2 or I want to cut your king on away from the king side with say rook to e6. Maybe that's a little bit better, right? So keep checking, right? First of all, I just have the king hideout on g2, and I think this is just Lucena position eventually, and we're going to win, right? So say king to f4, check, right? Say king to g4, rook g8, and as you can see, I'm making progress, right? Does that answer the question, Eccentric? This one was not in my analysis, so I had to figure it out live, but I think that the point is that after rook f8, all I have to do is free this square for my king to hide without allowing your king there in front of the pawn. Ah, you missed the skewer, right? So, but I don't have to go on the second. I could cut off Eccentric Horse, your king, from the king side, right? So I think maybe the first try rook a2, exactly, missed it after king f3. Yes, there is a skewer, right? Because king f3 otherwise is a draw. That's why when you made that comment, I thought that I might have failed, right? But I did not, because this is, of course, winning because I tested all of the positions on the engine. It's just that some wins are not so easy, right? So everyone who will watch this one more time, I encourage you to. At first we started with very easy and theoretical positions. Then we went to the practical ones that arise a lot. And at the very end, we saw huge, very hard examples that are just for the sake of beauty, and they have only small relevance because it's missed by the top players. But we love seeing those because they give us a pleasure by seeing something very, very nice as that picture skew, right? So I would like to thank everyone who joined the stream today. I would appreciate if you could put a like on this video. I really appreciate everyone who said hello and participated actively in the chat today. I hope to see you all on Tuesday. Stay healthy, my friends. Continue loving the game. Play chess online, study it, and see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.